Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Friends, I'm going to be sharing a lot of what I have been reading from a very important contribution to the debate focusing around animal welfare within Islam, authored by Al-Hafiz Bashir Ahmad Masri, the publication of the Islamic Foundation. As for my brief, I will be focusing largely on the theology and the teachings of Islam with regards to animal welfare, and perhaps then go on to reflect on the failings of Muslims in terms of implementing these teachings which are shared by all religious teachers. Many of us Muslims, we really are not fully aware of the scale of the exploitation of animals. We see a dish prepared for us at our dinner tables, but we don't go beyond our local butcher and before him or her to see where this animal's life originated and how it ended up on our dinner table. We become extremely selfish, always looking for the cheapest deal, cheapest butcher, where we can get a good bargain in terms of purchasing our meat. A very short-sighted interests, especially on the commercial side. Many of our Muslim outlets and butchers, abattoirs, are neglectful of the teachings of Islam and are out there to make a quick buck. This practice has led to an irreparable damage to the ecological balance. The Quran tells us that God has created the world with a certain kind of balance to ensure everything works, clockwork, most of the time. And it is man's inability to ensure that that balance is maintained that creates chaos in this system. The Quran recognizes the animals as communities like our own communities, human communities, and therefore we must treat them right. Chapter 6 verse 38 makes that absolutely clear. Within the legal side of Islam, from the Sharia law perspective, jurists do categorize God's creation in a certain order, where at the bottom of that order would be mineral kingdom, above that would be the plant kingdom, and above that would be the animal kingdom, and above them would be humankind. Above that are the angels, above whom there is only God Almighty. Sadly, cruelty to animals has been around since the creation of man and animal. And the cruelty has taken form in different ways. It's inflicted upon animals in many different ways. Before the age of mechanization, I guess a lot of the animals were used for carrying loads from one place to another, for transportation and for travel. So overloading, overworking of the animals, beating the animals to get them to do the work that the master wanted them to do, and of course sadly also hunting for sport, which brings absolute misery on these defenseless animals. And in a strange way, we as human beings have got so much time to kill, that's maybe not the right word to use, that we can afford to be at a pond, at a lake, fishing, catch the fish, and you throw it back into the water, maimed and damaged, not thinking of how that fish is going to feed itself for the remainder of its life, the quality of its life, as Aaron very importantly reminded us of the quality of life of these animals. And then we use the cruelest methods to kill these animals. Sometimes just for their fur and their skin, just for ornaments, trinkets, to make ourselves look pretty and beautiful. So what do we do now? And that's the reality. So what shall we do? We find that the nature and the extent of this cruelty to the animals is rampant on an industrial scale, and sometimes in very subtle ways, under the pretext of scientific research, looking for a cure for a certain kind of illness or disease, pharmaceutical experiments. Many of these diseases for which we are seeking a cure are the result of our own disorderly lifestyles. The latest technological and scientific tools are used in labs all around the world in the quest to genetically modify animals, changing what God has created in a natural way, given them the ability to survive in the natural habitats. We want to interfere with that and change that, not thinking how they would survive in a form which is not natural. So I feel very strongly, as my colleagues have said, that religion can and must play a very important role in challenging these prevalent forms of cruelty to animals. Our young friend did ask about why should we listen to religion. If I do a rough calculation, there must be about 2 billion Christians in the world, 1.5 billion Muslims, 1 billion Hindus. That's 4.5 billion individuals who believe in some form of guidance given to them in their religion. That's more than half the world's population. If we religious people can listen to that message in our scriptures, we will have made a huge, huge impact in the reduction of cruelty to animals. The Quran gives this human being a very important position. God's vicegerent on this earth. We've been given the responsibility to care for this planet and everything that lives on it. In chapter 95, verse 4, the Quran describes the human being as the best of creation. Why? Is it because we stand upright and have this beautiful form, this physical form? Or is there something more to it than just our physical being? We are the only species with the ability to distinguish between evil and good in a moral and ethical way. Animals can sense danger, but we can make those distinctions. We have the freedom of choice. And when we misuse this freedom of choice, the Quran says in chapter 95, verse 5, that this human being is reduced to the lowest of the low. We do not deserve to claim that lofty position that God has placed. The Quran lays down the criteria and principles for man's superiority. But if we don't live up to these moral and ethical values and principles, then we are no better than these animals. Chapter 7, verse 179 tells us, they have hearts, and humans have hearts with which they fail to comprehend, eyes with which they fail to see, ears with which they fail to hear. They are like cattle. No, they are worse, far astray from the right path. And it's very interesting that in many ways this human being is weaker than animals. If we look at some of the specifics and detailed differences, the Quran tells us that if a fly was to take something from the human being, there is no way the human being can get it back. We've all enjoyed an ice cream on a nice summer's day, and that fly will just come and have a taste and it's gone. That little bit of ice cream, you can never get it back. We are weak. In many ways, we are strong. Animals likewise. The Quran talks about the different animals and insects and it highlights their God-given abilities. The bee and the dance of the bee, so intricate. The scurrying ants, the spider and its web, so beautifully designed, so fragile. The camel, the train of the desert, and how it can survive for days on end without water. The cow and its ability to produce pure milk from its body through all the organs and the impurities that are present within its organs. We are only superior as human beings because of the spiritual volition. Otherwise, we're all the same, like the rest of God's creation. We're able to recognize the supreme creator in a spiritual way, connect with him as we enjoy his gifts. The Messenger Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that the creation is the family of God. He loves most those who are most beneficial to his family. We have a duty of care to every single being on this planet. Islam teaches that all creation glorifies God. God calls on us in chapter 53, verses 3 to 13, to maintain this balance which he has put in place. We created man and gave him the faculty of speech. The sun, the moon rotate in an ordered fashion, in an ordered orbit. The plants and the trees, they too prostrate before God. The firmament, he has raised it high and set the balance of everything, so that you, mankind, may not upset the balance. Keep up the balance with equity and do not fall short in it. And the earth he spread it out for all living beings, with fruits, blossom-bearing palms, chaff-covered cereal grain, and fragrant plants. Which then of the bounties of God will you deny? We also have been given the duty by God, as the Quran says in chapter 42, verse 11, to conserve his creation. He created males and females for procreation so that his creation does not become extinct. God, the originator of the heavens and the earth, he has created mates from you from amongst yourselves, and mates for cattle too, multiplying you thereby. And then it tells us also that animals communicate between themselves and sometimes with others, including human beings. Those of us who have pets experience that all the time. That little meow of our cat tells us exactly whether it's hungry, whether it's saying thank you, and it just wants a little cuddle. As I said, the buzzing of the bees, the sonic vibrations of marine mammals, the singing and the tweeting of the birds, is all communication. And then there are those special people of God, the messengers and the prophets. We think of the prophet king Solomon, heir to David, peace be upon them, who could speak bird language. He could tweet, not of the 140, but he could. The Quran says in chapter 27, verse 16, that he could communicate. He could hear the ants. When he would come with his large entourage into any area, ants would warn each other to say, get into your holes because Solomon's people are coming and they will trample you. And he could hear this conversation. So animals, little ants, they also have the ability to sense danger. They have the desire to be saved from harm and to save their kind from the harm of this human being. The Quran tells us of the value of animals to all of us. Times have changed. We live in a mechanized world. But God says in chapter 16, verses 5 to 8, that he has created cattle for you. You get from them your warm garments and other benefits, and you eat their produce. And you pride yourselves on their beauty as you drive them home in the evenings, and as you lead them forth to pastures in the mornings. And they carry your heavy loads to places where you would not otherwise reach except by laborious strain. Indeed, your sustainer is most kind, the grace of God, the giver of grace. And he has created for you horses, mules, and donkeys for riding as well as for adornment. And he will yet create things of which you have no knowledge now. And talking of feelings, animals also have feelings. Scientific research in this area is still in its very early stages to establish whether animals have been endowed with a conscious mind, whether they have been endowed with the faculty of a higher cognition. But from the hadith collections, the sayings of Muhammad, peace be upon him, Muslims can very confidently say that animals also have feelings. Feelings of hurt and joy, not just in the physical sense, not just the pain and discomfort of a physical attack, but of the heart. The Quran tells us that animals have a cognizance of their Creator, but we human beings are unable to understand that. In chapter 17, verse 44, the Quran tells us, the seven heavens and the earth, and all things therein declare His glory. There is not a single thing but celebrates His adoration. And yet you, mankind, you do not understand how they declare His glory. Chapter 22, verse 18 instructs us, Do you not see that all things pay adoration to God, things that are in the heavens and the earth, the sun, the moon, the stars, the mountains, the trees, the animals, and large numbers amongst mankind. God Himself communicates with these creatures directly, and they are able to respond to God's communication. Chapter 16, verse 68 tells us, And your Lord instructed the bee, Make hives in the mountains, and in the trees, and in human habitations. Animals have rights just as we have rights in all the resources of nature. We are equal tenants on this planet. So we must share the resources. God has assigned the earth to all living creatures, the Quran says in chapter 55, verse 10. Historically, man has always been in competition with animals for survival, fearful of starvation. Yet God declares and reassures us in the Quran, in chapter 11, verse 6, it tells us there is no moving creature on this planet, but God provides for its sustenance. So if we just reflect back on all the reasons why different forms of cruelty are inflicted upon animals, medical research, for instance. It's not to say that we should not have this medical research, but to look at whether it's necessary in the first place. Are there alternatives available? Is it genuinely about finding a cure for a killer disease? Or is it to further economic benefit? If you look at clothing, furnishings, there are other forms of garments that we could use to clothe ourselves. Islam forbids killing of wild animals for their fur and for their skin, to use their skin for even saddles. Muhammad, peace be upon him, forbade the striking of the face or the branding of the face of an animal. He said to his followers, fear God with regards to these dumb animals. You will be questioned by God as to how you have treated them. He himself was admonished by God for being neglectful towards his oath. Do not set up living creatures as targets. Islam totally forbids the hunting of animals for sport. And he told them a beautiful story of a woman of ill repute who showed kindness to a dog and gave it water to quench its thirst and was forgiven by God and attain salvation. He said a good deed done to a beast is as good as doing a good deed to a human being, while an act of cruelty to a beast is as bad as an act of cruelty to human beings. In light of all this, I think we as Muslims have a lot to think about, a lot to fix in how we approach this lifestyle of eating, which includes the eating of meat. Thank you so much for it.